been an eventful week for the team. Some folks know us, some don't. So why don't we start with just a quick round of intros? So I'll go from left to right on my screen. Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Butler. I'm the managing editor I'm the managing editor, reviews and standards at DPReview, which means I test an awful lot of cameras and have been for many years.
I'm Mitchell. I'm a reviews editor here. I work on a lot of the reviews. I read a lot of Richard's work and tell him, yeah, that looks great. And then he reads mine and is like, oh, this is terrible. So, you need to fix everything.
It's never terrible.
And Dale.
And I am Dale Baskin. I am the managing editor of DPReview.
And I'm Meekim. I help out with all the video, social, and conversations like this for DPReview. Okay, I have a list of comments, both passionate, some haters, some lovers, a lot of questions about the Fujifilm X-Half. I'm just going to read this list of some of our haters and our lovers. So the haters, gimmick for hipsters, for Gen Z, for social media only, JPEG only, dumb, unnecessary, premium toy camera. Many comments about, is this April Fool's? For those who are more excited about this camera, the vinyl of cameras, something creative for the right audience, fun, creative, and nostalgic many times over. So
I finally get the millennial experience of my generation being used as a pejorative. Let's go.
So I wanted to start through some of the key themes that we saw around price. That is definitely the most dicey topic we've seen this week. Richard, you spent the most time with this camera. You had thoughts very early on. How do you feel about the price?
Yeah, to be honest, I think the price makes it quite hard to step back and actually think about the camera, because let's not pussyfoot around this. It's high, but part of that, at least in the US, is almost certainly tariffs, and that's a road I really don't want to go down. But I was having a look at the UK price. In the UK, it's priced at 700 quid, which, for reference, the Sony ZV-1F, which was also a Type 1 sensor, fixed lens, aimed at a very different audience. Almost the antithesis of this camera. This is fun and enjoyable, whereas the ZV-1F, I wouldn't wish on anyone. But that was launched for £550. A couple of years ago. So we've been through a period of high inflation. In that light, £700 doesn't look so brutal. I think I just haven't got used to how much money has reduced in value over the last few years of inflation. So I still think that, a pint of beer should cost sort of, $6, and it does not. It's expensive. I don't think it's as outrageous. I think we all had sticker shock when we first saw it. Like, $850. It is a lot of money. But I don't think it's, in other countries, it's not so outrageous amount of money, as outrageous an amount of money as it first looked. It ain't cheap, but I think that sticker shock is stopping us actually sort of thinking about what the camera is and weighing it up on its own merits.
With that said, it is a lot of the appeal of this camera is sort of emulating the disposable film camera experience. And you could buy a lot of disposable film cameras for the price of this camera. Probably a lifetime supply, if we're being honest with ourselves about how much we'll actually use one.
But have you factored in?
Yeah, developing that film.
Exactly. And the price of developing is only ever going to go up. So,
This is true, but even still, I think you could get quite a few.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, we have a spread of age ranges on the team. I'm curious how much of us actually still shoot film regularly, because a lot of the conversation around this camera is, oh, it's aimed at a younger audience. Oh, it's trying to be something that it clearly is not. There's a lot of tension on both sides. So, Dale, do you still shoot film? If so, how regularly?
I was going to say define regularly. And by the way, I feel really left out because I'm the only person on editorial here who doesn't have the half frame camera to hold up and actually.
I don't have one either.
No, I know. I feel like everybody else has one they can hold up in front of them, and I'm feeling left out. It depends on how you define regularly. I love to put the occasional roll of film through a camera and take some photos. Sometimes it's just to play around with interesting film stock. Sometimes it's just because I enjoy shooting film. A little preview for anyone who's watching. I'm currently shooting a roll of Hello Kitty brand film I shot in Japan, which I'll hopefully be writing about for the site at some point. But, it's probably a once a quarter type of thing. I'll put a roll through a camera. So it's not an everyday thing for me.
Mitchell?
I don't shoot film nearly as often as I used to before I broke my film camera. But I've been looking to get back into it. And I have noticed with this camera, there are actually some film habits that I have from back when I shot it way more, especially in college, that make it very slightly annoying to use. Whereas if in film mode, when you do the film wind, it takes a second to register after you've taken the picture. So I'll take the picture, I'll wind the film, and it just won't count that wind. So I have to wait a beat and then do it again. Some could say that it's forcing you to slow down and think about the process. Others could say that it's messing with my muscle memory of how film cameras work.
That's fair.
Honestly, does it feel good to have your thumb on that thing again? One thing I miss sometimes is having that lever. And when I go back to a film camera, suddenly it feels really natural to flick it around.
I see so many people who have like the Fujifilm cameras, and they have sort of in the hot shoe plate, they've got that sort of advanced lever style thumb rest. So yeah, it is nice. I did show this to a friend the other day. And he was like, oh yeah, I wish it had like an actual resistance. Like you could feel the sprockets of the film being like you could feel that you were moving them through gears. It is just sort of a very linear actuation. But honestly, it feels nice.
I mean, if you're careless enough with it, I'm sure it'll get full enough with grit that it will start to get that kind of,
Yeah, after your beach day, you'll definitely have enough of a tactile experience.
Yeah. Someone will sell an upgrade kit to add that, I'm sure. Just look on eBay in about 3 weeks.
Exactly. Imagine the mods that will come out of this, right? So another thing that came up was the question around the lens. And Richard, I think you've made this point earlier at the beginning of the conversation around price point, sort of leading us astray from really being able to evaluate the camera for what it is and who it's for. Somebody asked specifically about glass, its components, and you made a really astute observation about how there are some quality elements to this lens. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody on Instagram asked whether it was a plastic or glass lens, which is the ultimate sort of 1980s question. You had cameras like the Lomo that had a simple plastic lens, or you had a camera with a good lens that was made of glass. I don't think that distinction makes sense anymore. Canon in some of its modern optics uses it calls them something like either plastic or polymer molded optics, because there are some really good modern plastics that you can mold into much more complex shapes much more readily than you can try and mold glass or then hope to polish them into shapes. So they're used in some some not super high end lenses, but engineering polymers are a good solution to some problems. So the whole glass plastic dichotomy isn't what it once was. This is not a toy lens. This is it's fun, and this is a fun camera, but it is not a toy. It's got a 6-element lens in 5 groups with 3 aspherics. It's not messing around. Someone has sat there and really just gone, okay, how do we make a nice lens in a small space? So I think ultimately the question was, is this just a toy? And in terms of the lens, no, it isn't.
The only concern that I would have is if the outer element is plastic, that is going to scratch way easier than a glass element was. I've been kind of tapping on it, and I find it hard to tell. It does feel like glass to me.
Yeah, I'd expect it to be. I think it's a protect. So what Mitchell's talking about, I don't know if you can see it clearly. There is a cover over the front of the lens, which is nice and flat, which means it makes it very easy to clean. So my guess would be, wow, that's how the word clean sounds, apparently. My guess, it looks as if it's got some kind of coating to it. My guess would be that's intentionally designed to be kept clean. It's nice and easy to run a microfiber over it, and it's almost certainly got sort of anti-dust coating of some sort on it.
We'll find out for sure when JRig Everything buys one and takes his picks to it and see what level it scratches at.
I'm going to guess this is somebody on YouTube.
Yeah, he durability test phones.
What about the film emulations? There's 10. How have you guys found the fidelity compared to other Fujifilm cameras you've shot with?
I mean, I haven't compared them closely, I must admit. I'm a bit surprised that sepia is one of the ones that makes the cut, because I've never found myself thinking, oh, I wish all my photos were brown. Still, but yeah, there are the ones that make sense. There's the sort of day-to-day ones like Provia and Astia and Reala Ace, and then the more fun ones like Classic Chrome, Classic Neg, Nostalgic Neg, and those can be really nice, and especially when you're trying to achieve a look. And this camera is all about trying to achieve a look. It's first and foremost, it's aimed at people who up until now have been going out and buying terrible compacts on eBay and using them until they die. Well, this is a camera that has the sort of fun shooting experience. You can fit it in your pocket, but will also produce really distinctive looking images. When we spoke to Fujifilm back in February, they were talking about, well, look, for certainly me and Dale's generation, we remember those cameras when they came out. We've lived through cameras getting better and better and better, whereas the current generation have only ever lived with cameras that produce really nice pictures. And so for them, that look, that sort of slightly wonky, terrible SNR, weird reds, all the things that compact cameras produced back in the 90s and early 2000s. That's what the pictures of their childhoods look like. That they have. It's a point of nostalgia for them in a way that for me it's just like, oh, I wish I'd had a better camera. So yeah, I think this is very much, I mean, it's weird. It takes photos that resemble film stocks of the 60s and 70s. So that's before my time. But we've all seen TV shows where suddenly the footage is trying to look dated, and that color response, that contrast, that tonal response, we all know what it means. It means, oh, this is the 1970s. So the fact that this camera has all of those modes, I think, is absolutely key. It to an extent, the film simulations almost make most sense on this camera out of anything in the Fujifilm range.
There is one important note, and that is that if you talk to any sort of dedicated Fujifilm user, it will be approximately 10 seconds before they bring up film recipes, which is that a lot of their cameras, especially the interchangeable lens ones, have a bunch of parameters that you can tweak. And what people will do is they'll share online, sort of, here's how I tweak these parameters to get this certain look. This camera does not have those. You are limited basically to the film emulations that are on it, and you can't really change those beyond adding a bit of grain. So that is something that when it comes to achieving a certain look, you are more or less going to have to stick with the one that Fujifilm is providing, or the ones that Fujifilm is providing with the camera.
I think there's another way to look at that too. I'm thinking back to, I believe it was either the Fujifilm X100F or it might have been the B. One of our former editors, Kerry Rose, reviewed it, and he's had one of the original X100s going back many years, and he always found it to be a really fun camera. And one of the things he wrote about is, at a certain point, this camera has evolved, and suddenly it kind of feels like it's more of a professional camera, and it's got enough bells and whistles that it's maybe not as fun anymore. And I do think there's something to be said for the more features you add, the more complex you make it, the less fun it becomes. So I can kind of understand the logic behind not putting the ability to do that into the camera. So I agree. That's a very
it would also be like it would be 4 menus long, and trying to adjust those on this touchscreen without any sort of buttons would be a nightmare. So I may understand why
it might exceed the limits of the UI on this particular camera.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Also,
I do think there's a certain irony to the fact, though, that we've been developing photography technology for 200 years now. And I always joke when I teach workshops that, hey, we finally reached the point in technology that we've gotten cameras that are so good that we can use those cameras to create crappy pictures that look like they came from cameras that are 50 years older. I don't know. I guess it's just nostalgia. It's the same reason we listen to vinyl, right? We have all kinds of high fidelity formats, but we still like to listen to vinyl.
And someone actually, that was a specific comment, one of my favorites. This camera is the camera of vinyl. It's making that exact same connection. But Richard, sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good analogy, because part of, I think most people have accepted at this point that vinyl is not technically better in any sense. There are people who like the sound better, but that's not the same as saying it's technically better still. But what I think is undeniable is the tactile experience of, okay, for a start, you've got the big sleeve, you take the disc out of the sleeve and you put it on the deck and you put the stylus down. It's an experience that you're involved in. Sure, you can get your smartphone and go play this tune, but that's the same as, oh, read my emails, read this text. It's not an experience. It's just, oh, function. The experience of, oh, I'm going to select the record, I'm going to take it out, and then 4 songs later, I'm going to have to turn it over. This is exactly that same thing. My phone will probably take technically better photos than the X-Half. It'll be easier to do so. It'll probably focus faster. The technical quality will be better. But I'll just go bang. Okay, I've recorded it. Next. Whereas even before you start playing around with the film mode, which is it's ridiculous and fun, or fun and ridiculous. It depends on what mood you're in. It just depends on your perspective. But for all that I'm calling this camera ridiculous and silly, I'm also trying to pair the word fun with it at all times, because it is definitely that. And it's even without using the film simulation mode, the film camera mode. It is a fun camera to use. Just sort of swiping to select your film simulation. Looking through the viewfinder, thinking about, could this, does this photo work? Actually, would it work as part of a diptych? What's the second photo I'd get that would, thematically fit with the first one to create a double image? It's fun. It's completely lost my point.
Well,
big year for
you're
cameras.
on something around, and you mentioned this as well too, Dale, but the idea that constraints can inspire creativity. And I know, Dale, a couple months ago, you were shooting with the half-frame Pentax. Is that right?
Last summer I shot with a half-frame Pentax for a while. So
this idea, some of the more positive comments and excitement around this camera were, in the right hands with the right mindset, this could unlock a lot of creative possibilities. So I'd love to hear from each of you about compositionally, right? If you know that you've only got this many frames to work with, you might have a half frame, a full frame. Are you then thinking about the experience of shooting differently as opposed to a phone, which is just an endless supply of exposures in a sense?
Well, in my case, I definitely do think about shooting differently. And I think it's because I learned to shoot on film. I still have that mentality that as soon as I pick up a film camera, I start doling out those exposures, essentially budgeting them, knowing I'm going to try to get through a certain period of time. And sometimes I decide not to take a photo because I'm budgeting those frames, or sometimes I decide to go ahead and blow a few frames. And it's a little bit like going to Vegas and throwing some coins in a slot machine and hoping you win big and get a good picture. But I did find, interestingly, with that Pentax camera, with the Pentax 17, I did find it was creatively a little bit of a challenge because it's a vertical frame. And of course, I learned on cameras that were horizontally framed. And it did cause me to have some creative decisions that I had to make. And I found that challenging, and I found that fun, and I found the process to be a little bit different. So that was a bit challenging to me. The thing I worry about with cameras like this is, at what point does the novelty wear off, right? We've had apps that you can get on your phone that essentially do this, where it will give you a certain number of photos to emulate that experience. And you can't see your photos until you've shot through the entire roll on the app. And I played with some of those. And Yeah, one might argue those have the flaw that the magic could be interrupted. You may be halfway through one of those rolls of film and suddenly you need to stick your phone behind the refrigerator to take a picture of the model number because you need to make a service call on it. It kind of breaks the magic. You know, I don't know that this will happen with this camera because you're not going to use it for those, you know, utilitarian types of things that you use a mobile phone for. However, I wonder how much staying power this camera will have in terms of longevity. Yeah, people are still using original X100 and going out and shooting those because they still take great photos. They still do the thing they bought them to do. Exactly, that's my point, Richard. The question is, at some point, will the novelty wear off on this? Yeah, it's fun. I absolutely agree. This type of thing is fun. It's creative. It gets you out. You have fun with that film lever. Will that still be fun in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years beyond the once a year when you open the drawer, you happen to stash it and you take it out, shoot one simulated roll of film and put it back in for another 5 years? I'm not sure it will have the staying power that, you know, a regular camera that's really designed for day in, day out use will have.
Can I disagree almost entirely?
Absolutely.
Ooh, all right.
This never happens at DP Review, by the way.
Right.
This is a very rare.
We all have the same opinion, right?
So I haven't really used the film camera mode really at all on the camera. I used it a little bit to work out how it works and what it does. But I had the camera for a relatively short period of time. I needed to get a sample gallery together. And in film camera mode, you're stuck in one film simulation for 36 or 54 or 72 shots. I couldn't afford to do that. I needed to just sort of try a number of different film simulations. It wasn't a good fit for what I needed to get done. Also, I'm someone who takes themselves far too seriously to play around with film camera mode. Which is a criticism of me, not film camera mode. But that just wasn't the way I was using it. I really enjoyed having a camera I could stick in my pocket. I've been reviewing cameras a long time, and I used to hate reviewing compact cameras, quite like an Enthusiast Compact, but nobody makes them anymore. It's been so long since I've had a camera that I can just throw in my pocket at all times and then get out and go, okay, this isn't going to take a perfect representation of the scene, but that's interesting. I'll take a photo of that. That I don't think is going to get old. And if I think you're right in the sense that the film camera mode you'll use a couple of times and then some people will get bored of it. Other people will use it as that creative challenge. But I think as a really cute device that's physically engaging to use and that takes that you can get really interesting looking pictures out of, I don't think that's going to get old. And I think even comparing it to the X100 is I think is to miss the point by a mile. The X100 was trying to be a professional camera. It was the first version was quite basic. I think it's added too many functions and got a bit cluttered and sort of lost its focus along the way. But it was always supposed to be a very serious photographer's camera, and Annie Leibovitz, famously had one very early on. No, I don't think many big name portrait photographers are going to rush out and buy one of these. It's not. I
can't disagree with that. Yeah.
This is, as I say, it's not a toy, but it is fun. It's not about, I need, if you're worrying about the specs and the image quality, you're looking at the wrong camera. It's they share a broad sort of look, but that's about where the overlap finishes. This is not a camera for I need to get the photo. It's the same thing I was saying about the Sigma BF last month. If you're going somewhere and there's a specific photo you have to get, well, there's 1,000,001 cameras that will do that. They'll have great autofocus and they'll have, all the controls you want at your fingertips, and you can respond when the moment happens. But that isn't everything that photography is. Sometimes you just want to go out into the world and take photos of things as you encounter them, not specifically to go out, not to go out and take one specific thing. Photography can be all sorts of things, and the sort of going out and discovering something and going, I'd like to take a photo of that, or how can I take a photo of that? that's just as relevant as I'm going to go and shoot a bike race, and I need to use a high shutter speed and really effective autofocus. And yeah, this camera isn't about that. I need to get the shot. It's about something you have in your pocket at all times. That friend you haven't seen for a while, that afternoon where you ended up doing something unexpected, and you want to capture a memory of it. It's that. And as if you try and compare it to most cameras, then yeah, it's going to look ridiculous. But that's not the point.
Right, you're missing the point. Mitchell, you split the difference between Dale and Richard? I'm so curious.
I think that like it is nice that you can, to Richard's point, you can carry it around with you in your pocket or your purse or wherever, and just have sort of like a camera with you, because people will react differently if you're taking a picture with a phone or with a camera. People just sort of tend to take things a bit more seriously if you bring this out, or they try to do something a bit more fun because they're like, oh, you're like pretty serious about capturing this moment, so like let me make sure I'm performing for the camera rather than just this is one of 1,000 photos on your phone that you'll never look at. And I think the fact that it can do both is really nice, because sometimes you just have the urge to shoot a roll of film, and a lot of times I let that pass me by because my film camera is broken, or I don't feel like developing a roll of film in the next few weeks, or the disposable cameras are really expensive now. But with this, if you do have that urge, it's literally a button press away. So it's, even if it gets old, or if it's not something that you want to use all the time, it's there when you want it. And I think if you are the type of person who's going to bring this camera around with you, that helps a lot. If you are, like Dale said, not really someone who's used to carrying around a camera and probably won't, and you just leave this in the drawer, then yeah, I suspect you won't get a ton of value out of it. And I think there will be people who are like that, who will buy it because they think they're going to use it, and then don't end up doing it all that much. But I think that's true for anything.
Right. I mean, let's talk about a real issue around availability. We've seen this with previous models here. And it ties back to the earlier discussion around price point. A lot of sentiment about, is this a joke, truly? Because my favorite comment was, should be X half the price, right? Like, people are, if it's aimed at a different kind of content creator, is the price point the sweet spot? Is it too high? Can people even get this thing? What is your perspective?
X-Half the price is really funny. It's, I think, pretty unrealistic. This is a camera that is essentially entirely made of custom parts. Like, I don't think there's really any other part that it shares with any other Fujifilm camera, so they're not getting sort of the economies of scale with it. I totally get that, the feeling that it should be cheaper. Because when they were describing it to me, I was like, oh, wow, I have like 5 friends that I'm going to recommend this camera to, including my wife, which is really real for me, because that means that's money coming out of our bank account if we decide to buy one. And then they told me the price, and the list of people I would recommend it to dropped to 0, because I was just like, there's no way I can convince any of these people to do that, including myself. But like Richard said before, this may just be part of the painful period where we are all like, oh, I guess this is how much cameras cost now, and probably how much everything else costs now. I think it could be cheaper, but putting that aside, I think the young people that it's aimed at have less disposable income than sort of the more established photography community who's been doing it for years. And I think that's a bit of a problem for them, because, $850 out of your big adult paycheck is, not something that most people are going to take lightly, but it's something that they can just be like, I'll save up for a month or 2 and buy that. But if, you're still working your minimum wage job and paying off student loans, that's suddenly a purchase that you have to take a lot more seriously. And that's sort of where a lot of the target audience of this camera is at right now. Or they'll just afterpay it and be paying, $20 a month for the next 2 years,
A lot of interest.
alongside the Chipotle, the Chipotle clone that they did. I don't want to talk about that. That's going to make me sad. As for availability, we'll see. The XM5 is still really hard to get in the US. The X106 is impossible to get in the US unless you're willing to pay scalper prices or wait a really long time. Fujifilm does seem to be having a bit of an issue with producing the cameras that it's announcing. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out with this.
Yeah, and to that point, it's, the X106 is a special case. They swear they thought they'd made enough, and then demand was, multiples of what they'd forecast. And they've been talking about trying to ramp up production. And, I used to write about manufacturing and engineering, and none of this stuff is easy. But the X106, has these intricately machined parts, and you need specialist machinery for it. You can't just rush out and buy 4 new CNC machines or 40 new CNC machines if in 3 months' time, we've satisfied all the back orders. What are we going to do with all these CNC machines we've just bought? This is not intricately machined. To Mitchell's point, it doesn't use a lot of components that are shared with other cameras. So I think the question is going to be, why is the XM5 not available? Because it's not because it's as difficult to make as the X106. So is there just one component missing? Can they not get sensors or screens or something? Without us knowing what is causing the XM5 to be delayed, it's impossible for us to speculate on whether they're going to be able to churn these out in their hundreds and thousands, or whether this is also going to be perpetually back-ordered. I don't think Fujifilm wants to be in a position where lots of people want its cameras and it can't sell any, because that doesn't look great on the balance sheet. Lots of people would like to buy our cameras is kind of a hard sell to your shareholders. But yeah, you have to assume they at least are going to try to be able to make them.
I will say you can currently buy the Instax Mini 41 pretty easily, and that just came out. It'll be interesting to see about the Instax Wide Evo, because I feel like those cameras are a little bit closer sort of in how they're produced to this camera, especially the Evo, where it is just a digital camera with a printer on it. That's probably a closer analog than an X106.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are, understanding this camera, you should be looking as much towards the Instax range, who buys them, who they're for, as you do towards, actually probably more so than towards the X series. This has as much to do with Instax as it does to do with X series. And let's not forget, Instax sells well and makes Fujifilm money in a way that X series doesn't. Instax is where all the money comes from, if you look at Fujifilm's accounts.
I'll make a prediction right now that Fujifilm will sell a boatload of these. I think they are going to be popular. Whether they're so popular that you can't get them for the next year, I don't know. I would be surprised if they're that popular. But I think there is a market for this, and I've seen a lot of people compare it to other Fujifilm models like XE5, X100, whatever. Not just in terms of capabilities, and I do think it's wrong to conflate the two, because they're aimed at completely different groups of people who have completely different intents for how they plan to use a camera. But I've also seen people make the complaint that, hey, by producing this, you're not producing something else. And the former product manager in me looks and says, it's not always an either or decision. As Richard mentioned, the way this camera is manufactured, if you just look at the parts, it's very different than the way you manufacture something with a lot of mechanical moving parts. Doesn't necessarily mean you're not using a factory to produce something else because you're making this camera. And you may even have outsourced this camera to a factory somewhere else. I have no idea where Fujifilm makes this, but it's not always a choice of just because you're producing product A doesn't mean you have flexibility to produce product B. So I certainly wouldn't want to make that assumption. I wouldn't be surprised if there are shortages with this, though, because again, as a product manager, as a product planner, the one thing you don't want to get stuck with is a lot of inventory. because inventory is very expensive and it's a very bad thing. And as a product manager, you don't want a lot of inventory on your P&L at the end of the quarter. So given the economic uncertainties and I'll call it chaos in the markets right now, I think it would be reasonable for companies, Fujifilm included, to maybe underestimate demand, or especially if the prices are a little higher than they might have anticipated, rather than overestimate, because they don't want to end up with that inventory. So just because of that and the popularity of the general format, these rangefinder style cameras, I think there probably will be some inability to get them initially, but I don't see them being long-term as hard to get as, say, an X100.
There's also like a real culture these days about buying things at launch. Like launches are big. And any popular product is really hard to get the first time it comes out. You see it with, the Nintendo Switch 2. You see it with concert tickets. Like things are oftentimes quite difficult to obtain now. And whether that's this big surge in demand from people who want to make sure that they're not like missing out on something, or just because things are like harder to make in infinite supplies these days, there is a lot of things in the world that are like this. And I don't know if beyond the X100 we've seen that come to the camera world as much, but I suspect it will. And we've seen hints of it with other cameras where they'll post statements being like, oh, this might be a bit hard to get.
Well, let's be honest. If there's a product you legitimately want, you better order it at launch if it's one of these that becomes hard to get, because if you don't get in line at launch, you may not get it for 6 or 8 or 9 months. So I completely get the mentality and the reason people are jumping on them and doing that.
I mean, conversely, it's slightly different in the US where things are sold at their MSRP for much longer. In Europe, prices start high, and once they've been on the shelves for a bit, they drop. And I must admit, personally, I'm the kind of person who'd rather wait 6 months until the price has dropped a bit and then buy one at the price they settle down to and sell for most. I don't necessarily want to pay that early adopters premium. And Mitchell, to your point about concert tickets, the analogy with X100 is, to what degree is it scalpers? Is it people just buying up X100 because they know they're going to be in demand? Because the X105 was hard to get hold of. They know they're going to be in demand and then sell them for a markup on eBay. And a lot of the frustration about, X100 is so expensive. Like, well, it's not Fujifilm making that money. It's people scalping on eBay.
And that's been happening for years. Basically, the first time I noticed it being like a real problem was with the 7th, 8th generation console launches, like the PS5. And it's been a nightmare ever since. It hasn't stopped. Like the Switch 2 is still extremely hard to get. I don't know.
So, Fujifilm CEOs, when asked by analysts, was asked, oh, well, look, Canon's built too many products and it's got them sitting around in warehouses and it's having to write down the value of those assets. Is this going to happen to you? And he said, no, we're being very careful not to make too many. Now, this is often being reported as, oh, they're intentionally restricting supply. Now, those two don't quite mean the same thing. It's being presented as if it's this smoking gun. It's like, oh, it's all a strategy. That's the company is denying this. I don't think it makes sense financially. I don't think they're trying to restrict it. But to Dale's point, nobody can afford to have a warehouse full of products. So, with the X100 that isn't going to be an issue. They've already got the orders. They would love to be able to fulfill them. Getting back to the camera, like the reaction, everyone's reaction to this camera that I've encountered with, while I've been using it, has been real excitement. Lots of people who, lots of my friends who usually see me shooting with cameras for work have gone, oh, what's that? And then it's like, hang on, is that got a film wind lever? Oh, what, they've watched me changing the film stock and they've got really interested in it. Now, admittedly, once I told them the price, they were like, less, but a lot of them were
plateau, as Mitchell said. Well, there's a real question that remains to be seen. Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of, I've seen this camera generate interest from the kinds of people who usually don't give a damn about cameras. And, the people who do give a damn about cameras are just like, oh, well, that's not for me. Like, no, it isn't. You know,
Not news to Fujifilm.
Well spotted. In putting the sample gallery together, the barista at my local coffee shop was kind enough to pose for a portrait, and I sent a photo through to her after the launch. And I was chatting to her just before this call, and she's like, "Oh, what was that camera you're shooting?" And Googled it and looked it up, and it's like, "Oh, that's really cute." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, it is. It's really fun." And I said, "Oh, it's $850." She's like, "I've been after a new camera." Didn't bat an eyelid. Just that looks really beautiful. It looks like the kind of thing I'm after. Was much less put off by the price. And frankly, she is the audience for this camera in a way that none of us sitting here are. And
you bring up a really good point around that, because I think we're also obviously very close to this material all the time, and we work with all different kinds of gear. It's in and out of our hands. But how often is someone actually buying one, right? So it's encouraging to hear that she felt excited and not discouraged by that price point.
I mean, look, we love to be pixel peepers here at DP Review, and we have an audience full of pixel peepers. We're let's admit it, we're gearheads. We're also photographers, but I think this product is a classic example of the need to recognize that not all products are designed for you necessarily. And I know I've seen some complaints from the Fujifilm faithful and hardcore photographers not being happy about what this product is and calling out all of its perceived shortcomings. And it is an opportunity to recognize, okay, this is one of those products that's actually not designed for you. Don't get too upset about it. It's not that they were trying to design it for you and they missed. They just weren't trying to design it for you, period. So get over it. Yeah, they will come out with something for you eventually. This isn't it.
Totally. That's a really important point and a great distinction. Do anybody else have any closing thoughts? We've been blabbering on for an hour here already.
I will say,
I just feel bad. I haven't had a chance to shoot one. I keep seeing them hold this up, and I want to go down to the coffee shop and start taking photos of baristas. This looks fun.
One of the people, like Richard said, one of the people that I thought would be interested until they heard the price, I have already seen them start the justification process. So I feel like it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, and I think I said right at the top of the call, I think, I said right at the beginning, I think that the price, is such an obstacle to you and then stopping and think about the camera. I mean, let's be clear, by our standards, the image quality isn't great. In fact, Mitchell, I think you were saying you were surprised at how little image quality they'd got out of such a big sensor. And I, it is going to be interesting to look closer at the images as we go on, but that kind of isn't the point. People aren't buying, clunky Casio CCD compacts on eBay because the image quality is great. They're buying them because, they're nostalgic, they're fun, they're convenient, they perform a function that they're a kind of fun that you don't get from a modern camera or from a smartphone. And the fact that someone's managed to produce a modern camera that gives you a load of that, very much like Ricoh was trying to do with the Pentax 17, sort of, you can buy old film cameras, but this one has a warranty and will work. And, I think it's a really interesting camera. It's not aimed at me, but even I can see what fun it is.
As far as I can tell, image quality hasn't stopped a lot of people from buying Instax film.
Exactly. If you are at Fujifilm and you know that, they secretly detuned the image quality because they're like, no, it's too good, we need to make it worse so that people like it, please email me. I would love to hear.
Please reach out.